Hi there, it's Kevin with a Rogue Deck Builder. Cue the downvotes. We're doing a Flesh and Blood deck. No one came to this channel to see that. Kevin's sold out. I've sold out and started playing Flesh and Blood. My initial reaction to Flesh and Blood was quite sour. I did buy a box of Welcome to Wraith when it first, I guess not when it first came out, when Unlimited came out. And we tried to build some decks out of a sealed booster box, and it was miserable. There just wasn't enough stuff. You got a lot of repetitive stuff, and the decks were like wonky, and the lack of decks you could build was actually quite abysmal. And I still kind of feel that way about Flesh and Blood. The sealed, the draft, the limited leaves a lot to be desired, especially when you have Magic, when you can open up one booster box and then the combinations are pretty limitless with what you get even from one booster box. Whereas, man, to find the right amount of cards for Flesh and Blood is cracking a lot of boxes. The Tellurian Community Colleges and all these other people that keep just spilling this stuff that this is such an accessible game cannot be further from the truth. This is definitely a game where you have to open up a lot of product to get a lot of the cards you need, and then you get a lot of excess stuff. So I think that people need to be more honest with Flesh and Blood. It's very typical, like any other collectible card game as far as that aspect is concerned. So with that out of the way, I am enjoying the game though. I think that there is still enough to satisfy that deck builder crave in the game, because this game is more about tuning. It's very nuanced as far as what cards you want to use. There aren't like these, and it's actually refreshing, because Magic, I've complained recently, is autopilot. Even in deck building, it's autopilot. Like, look at Cycling from Mycoria. Basically, they built the deck for you. They built you a 60-card deck out of the set. You just chuck it all together. I think these one-set blocks are really ruining how deck building used to be made, where you had to when you had 3-block sets, they had more to experiment with, more synergies. They didn't have to shove everything in one set and make it like an auto-include way to build a deck. I mean, the same thing with Mutate from Mycoria, for example. Everything to build a standard constructed deck needed to be put in one set, and it ends up having push cards or mechanics that instead of having more creativity to make them work, end up just being shoo-ins. And I've been very disappointed with Magic in that aspect. Whereas Flesh and Blood, it doesn't have some of these like cards that you're obviously going to play 100% of the time. Now there are some of them. In this particular one, we'll see with these specialization cards, definitely are going to be kind of centered around your hero. So if you don't know how to play Flesh and Blood, go look at a tutorial. Basically, you choose a hero. You can only contain cards that are the heroes. So, for example, this guy can only have warrior cards, and he can also contain light cards. So you cannot have shadow cards in his deck. So you can run generic cards, warrior cards, and light cards in Bolton. And then they have a hand size and a life total. So very similar to Magic in that. The next thing you have is you have weapon slots, armor slots, and whatnot. So if you're looking for a tutorial how to play the game, go look at that. There's some people that are much better to do that. I'm a brewer, so I like to brew. And I haven't really seen a lot of content with like deck. This is one problem that we're already starting to see with Flesh and Blood, is the tier decks that get off, tournament results lead to tier decks and blah, 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 blah. But I actually think that we haven't scratched the surface on what actually is the best deck. Like, it hasn't been solved like we do see with Magic. And what main reason we do with Magic is they have an online presence. Like things like Arena and MTGO are going to just speed up the process of solving the format. But I also think that Magic has been plagued, like I said earlier, with just these shoe-in duck cards that have solved the format quicker than anything imaginable. When they print cards like the Ultimatums, the Yorions, Ambercleaves, they are going to define everything around them. And I'm not saying Flesh and Blood doesn't have that, because it kind of does. But I do feel like there is more room to explore and more room for brewers to kind of break the formats, or at least try to tune the formats. And that's the name of the game with Flesh and Blood, is tuning. So instead of trying to find wonky combos or synergies or strategies, you basically it's all about tuning. So this is my attempt of building a weapons Bolton. So Bolton is right now focused more on, there's two ways of building more of a tier based Bolton, and one of them is with his legendary weapon. That is an expensive card at the moment. I can't remember what it's called, but it's a pretty decent weapon that then has a lot of good synergies with his charge ability. And then there's a saber, a one-handed saber weapon strategy with Bolton, but the chest piece is like $100. And what this deck is very accessible. Most of the cards are right out of Monarch, and I've had pretty decent success with this deck. So I'm just going to go over the deck tech of what I've come up with. And again, I need to explore some other sets. This is strictly from Monarch. This is just cards using Monarchs. No legendaries. No S's, whatever S stands for. I can't remember at this point. And I believe it's only 6 of the Majestics. And basically you get Minerva, which is considered one of the Majestics. You buy 2 of the Blitz decks, you get all the Minervas you need for this. I'm actually surprised to see a lot of people don't like this card, and this is why. This is basically the focal point of this card, is to try to build the most tuned deck to actually use this mentor type of effect. So anyway, this is going to be a I want to say brawl. That's not the right term. Blitz. A Blitz deck for Bolton, and that's where you're seeing 2 ofs here of the list here. And this is going to be focused on trying to make the hatchets work. So everyone keeps trying to go with the legendary weapon. Again, I can't remember what the stupid weapon's called. Or they're trying to go the one-handed sabers, which again is very inaccessible with a card out of Crucible Wars you need to make that work. So this is going to be Hatchet Bolton, Hatchet Man, tuned as best as possible using, I believe it is only Monarch cards. So I don't have any non-Monarch cards. So if you're brand new to the game, you don't need to go outside of Monarch. You can, I think maybe there is one card that I have. Yep, okay, never mind. There's one card. There's one card that I've got outside of Monarch because Monarch doesn't have a decent chest piece to run in here. So there is one card that I think is pretty decent, but it's a common that you can get out of Arcane Rising that is just going to be a budget Bolton deck that works. It does focus around the hatchets, and it does focus around Minerva, of trying to make hatchets and Minerva work the best as humanly possible. All right, let's get down to the deck tech now that I've rambled for 6 minutes, almost 7 minutes, explaining the process of brewing. So I've lost everyone and got a bunch more downvotes in the process. All right, Bolton. Bolton's awesome here because Bolton feels like kind of a mix between a mono white and a mono red deck. So yeah, Boros Bolton. And what I kind of like about Boros opposed to just like mono red is you do tend to need to have you need to have a strategy and a lot of synergies and a lot of build up. It's a lot of prep to get that big turn in. And Bolton feels this way. So Bolton feels like you're going to be prepping and prepping and prepping with his charge ability, building up some souls for doing a big, massive swing. He's pretty decent on defensive if you need to be defensive, but he can get that really good turn to start putting pressure on the opponent, and then they have to go into defensive mode. And once they're in defensive mode, Bolton is very good at continually applying the pressure until you eventually your opponents do succumb. Now there is one problem with this particular build is you do run out of steam though. If you early on have to blow a lot of your equipment, you can lose that momentum and then you're just really far behind. And then Bolton is not as good at coming back from behind, which is some haymaker cards that some of the other decks have access to. So with that explained of the choices here will make more sense. Again, there's a million other lists right now of utilizing Bolton with the other weapons, but this is trying to make Hatchet Man, trying to make more of a weapons-based Bolton work. All right, so first of all, let's talk about the cards that, well, first of all, with Bolton. Bolton's abilities are: if charged this turn, attacks you control have +1 while defended by an attack action card. This is good against a variety of different decks. It's kind of terrible for anything out of Arcane Rising because they have so many non-attack action cards that they can defend with. But typically speaking, most of the time when you charge with Bolton, they are going to have to block with attack action cards, and that gets the +1. And that's super important because the attack reaction is you can banish a card from Bolton's Soul to give target attack with greater power than its base power against Go Again. So its ability, Bolton is able to then give all of the attacks Go Again, and if you have a lot of souls saved up, then you can do multiple attacks on the same turn. We're talking sometimes 3, 4, 5 attacks on the same turn, and that's going to get you those big turns and the big pressures that are going to put your opponents into defensive mode. The Hatchet Body Mind are pretty body and of mind are pretty self-explanatory. They attack for 2, but if you attacked with a hatchet before it, say you attacked with the mind and then the body is going to get +1. And it does say +1 until end of turn. That's also super important with this particular build, because if we do get attack again when they've already got that +1, so say we attack with the hatchet, say we attack with the hatchet mind, it gets +1. Say we attack again with this hatchet, it gets +1, and then we're able to get off another attack with this hatchet mind. That +1 is still going to be there until end of turn. So, and it's hitting for a lot higher at that point, and that's pretty relevant in the scope of things. So we are going to be running the hatchets with Bolton. Let's go over the pieces here. The first one is the Gallantry Gold. You get this in the Bolton deck, and it's simply has an action of destroying gallantry gold. Your weapon attacks gain +1 until end of turn. Now, this is kind of awkward too because you don't want to break the chain by cracking this gallantry gold. You want this deck does want to have a consistent attack chain with both V of the Vanguard and I think Luminous Ascension. I can't remember if Luminous Ascension does need to be in the same chain. We'll go over it in a second though. But V of the Vanguard is super important if you have this card out and you're ready for a big V of the Vanguard to crack it before you do anything else. That way you don't break up the combat chain. Again, this is for people that are just getting into the game. This might not make sense. Go look at the rules and stuff and you'll figure out what I'm saying with this. So it's super important with Gallantry Gold to crack it early. Or crack it at the first of your turn. It does like televise what you're doing to your opponent, but it's still, you know, it's super important in my opinion to do so, not break your combat chain. So Gallantry Gold says your weapon attacks gain +1 until for this entire turn and go again, which is super important with then being able to get off multiple attacks because it gives that +1 attack, meaning you can start using your souls to gain go again. All right, so the only other non-monarch card I believe that is in this deck is going to be the Vest of the First Fist. And when you attack, when an attack action card you control hits, you may destroy Vest of the First Fist if you do gain 2 energy. This is very, very important again for a big turn to get that 2 energy. Allows you to attack twice more, hopefully with your hatchets. So that is very, very good for a big turn with the Vest of the First Fists, and is a very budget card, just being common. And then the Halo of Illumination. Typically, this is something if you're you can crack on your first turn. So if your opponent is one of those players that on their first turn just says like Arsenal card go, you can actually just crack the Halo of Illumination by putting a card in your soul and drawing a card. So at least you do something on your first turn, and that nets you down a card. So if you do it on, if you're going second, cracking the Halo Illumination is really good on that first turn. It has Spell Void too, which actually comes in handy versus like chain decks and stuff. But this is a good way to get a soul immediately into your soul to set up. Again, Bolton is all about building up, building up, building up, and going for that big turn. And then the other one that is kind of debatable with, well, this one is the other card that's not out of the set. This is out of Wrath, is Refraction Bolters. When a weapon you control hits, you may destroy Refraction Bolters if you do the attack gains go again. I think it's super important to give your weapons go again. There is another one called the Snapdragon Scalers that gives an action card with 1 or less go again. That is also a leg slot that is very it's you can easily justify putting in it here. I'm more of a weapons focused, but that's I don't know. I keep going back and forth between the Refraction Bolters and the Snapdragon Scalers and whatnot. All right, so let's talk about the important cards of the deck. So these are kind of like the nuts and bolts of the deck. First of all, I wanted to tune Minerva the best as possible. Minerva says, I don't know if it's showing up on my camera here, kind of tough to see here in this lighting. You know, fix my lighting. It says, at the start of your turn, Minerva is face down in your arsenal, so you have to play Minerva from the arsenal. That's why a lot of people don't like to play these mentors, because they're super good if you can get them on turn number 1, and that's why I think that it's very important for it to have this card. Or it's the rewards are better than the risk. You can't ever pitch this card, which this card has lost me the game because I wasn't able to pitch it for energy. But it can defend for 3, which is important. And what I like about Bolton is Bolton can just charge this. It just charge Minerva under your soul, and you know, no harm, no foul. It's something that just didn't come at the opportune time. But if you can get in your arsenal, you can turn it face up. You can do some big turns while still charging your soul and start to get some counters on Minerva, and Minerva pops. So it gets 100 weapons +1, and whenever weapon you control hits, you put a lesson counter. And then when it has 3 or more counters on Minerva, you get to go and get the V for the Vanguard, which is probably the second best card in the deck. So Minerva, to get your second best card, also pumped up your weapons, which allows you to have some go again actions, allows you to have some, you know, some good tempo plays. I think is worth the play 2 of in the deck. So I do have 2 Minervas in here. A lot of us aren't playing it, and I don't fault people for not playing Minerva, but I think that again the risk does justify the reward, or the reward does justify the risk to include in the card. Next up is what we talked about was V for the Vanguard. This is a super good card because it allows you to, just on any turn, any old turn, well, this is really good to play from your arsenal if you got a lot of souls charged up, and it's a really good way to charge your soul. Jesus does not want to focus on this guy. So the V for the Vanguard says, as an additional class to play V for the Vanguard, you may charge your hero's soul any number of times. And then attacks you control this combat chain gain +1 for each light card charged this way. So that's why I've transitioned. There are some cards like Nimblism that are super good in this deck, but they're not light cards. So going like more of this Monarch strategy with a bunch of light cards with V for Vanguard, I think is important, because if you do get a big turn with V for Vanguard, typically what you want to do is play this from your arsenal, put 2 cards under in your charge zone. That gives everything +2 on this combat chain. So if you cracked like the Gallantry Gold early, and then play this from your arsenal, pitching like a blue card, and then pitching the other 2 light cards into your, not pitching, but putting them under your soul. You're going to have go again on your next attack, because then you can take one out of your soul to give it go again, and then you can give the following one go again as well, and they're all going to get +2 attack. So you're getting in for some huge swings that turn. Another thing you can do with V for Vanguard is simply just charge your entire hand. So again, if it's played from arsenal, you can get 3 cards under your soul, and it doesn't lead to like the most snazzy play ever, if that's the case, but at least 3 cards in your soul and attacking for 6 for 1 is not a bad turn, and then refilling up your hand and having a big turn the following turns. So 2 of these are pretty cool for the deck. It's a great card, especially since it can be tutored up with Minerva. And then the other card that is really good with the charge abilities from this, so the whole point of playing Bolton, is Illumine Ascension. It's the best card in Bolton by far. Until you turn weapons you control gain +1, and if this hits, reveal the top card of your deck. If it's a light card, put in your hero's soul, and gain 1, otherwise put in the bottom of your deck. So I'm going to play around with Illumine Ascension with even more like attacks to try to go more of attacking with weapons Bolton. But it's again, if you can attack multiple times with your hatchets, they do continue that +1 until end of turn, and that will stack, which is pretty cool with the Illumine Ascension. And if you can actually start hitting stuff by gaining life and putting it in your hero's soul, that's pretty cool too with that ability. So yep, pretty awesome action to start it off with Bolton on a big play. You can easily on the kind of magical Christmas land scenario, if this was in your arsenal, you can hit for like 20 damage in a turn easily, or even higher than that, or at least expect your opponent to block like 20 damage worth of stuff and just really put them on their heels at that point. The next one though, which is going why I call this weapons Boltons, is we're gonna be playing these 2 cards. The first one is Spill Blood. This is such an overlooked card. This is a pretty good card because again, if you can attack multiple times, this has huge synergy with Illumine Ascension, because axes you control gain +2 and dominate until end of turn. Go again. So if you hit some good stuff off, like you play these 2 cards, okay, you pitch a blue card, hopefully you've charged 2. I guess you'd have to charge. It is kind of hard at that point. The best case scenario is if you do get a charge to hit, and then you can crack your vest to the first fist to generate some more energy, then the Illumine Ascension and the Spill Blood on the same turn is possible, and then your attacks are going to be doing 3. Your axes, they have Dominate, which means they're most likely going to hit, which makes Illumine Ascension put more souls into your soul, and allowing you for even more additional attacks, because this allows additional attack, which they still get Dominate. This pushes through a lot of damage. That Dominate ability is really good. If you don't know what Dominate is, Dominate means they can only block with 1 block. They have to use defense action cards at that point. They just can't, right here in the bottom corner, that means you can only use one of these cards to block with. So Spill Blood is a 2-of to make your axes gain. This is also not a bad card just to play on a turn, and if you have like a soul, and say you have to pitch like even just a blue card at that point. So you pitch a blue card, you play Spill Blood, you attack with your Hatch of the Mind for 4 with Dominate. You can then get something out of your soul to give your next hatchet, go again, and then you're going to be attacking in at that point for 5. That's not a bad turn. Not a bad turn at all for very little resources spent to get like a nice 4 or 5 attack with the Spill Blood. But it does have huge synergy again with some of these other cards that you can play that have bumped up your weapons for that particular turn. All right, so the last one we're going to talk about is the Dustpath Pilgrimage. This is your next weapon attack. This turn gains +3, and if it hits, you may attack an additional time. Again, this is really good with your hatchets because they do resume. Ideally, you want to attack with a hatchet. Hopefully, you've plussed it, and then you attack with your other hatchet, which gains no, that's not how you do. You do use on your first one. You give your first one +3. And if it hits, you can attack with additional time. So it hits for 5 here with the Dustpath Pilgrimage. If it hits, Then you attack with your other Hatchet, which hits for 3, and then you can re-attack with this one, which then hits for an additional 1 after that, which will hit for 6. So this Dustpath Pilgrimage just leads to some pretty big turns. So rambling pretty bad with this video. Hope I'm making sense to all the people that actually do understand Flesh and Blood. All right, so let's go over kind of the charge effects. This is a charging Bolton deck. You're going to be running basically almost all of the charge effects possible. The best charge, hands down, is Take Flight. Take Flight has Go Again, naturally built into Go Again for just 1. It also hits pretty decent, comparatively speaking, to the other ones. So 1, you charge your soul, you Go Again. It leads to some great turns for, dishing off some damage and starting to build up your soul. So we're on every copy. This is not a bad blue card to be just used as a card rather than a pitch. So the yellow, the blue, and the red, all of them are being played. The second one we're going to be playing all of them, which is slightly worse, is going to be the Engulfing Light. So Engulfing Light, as the yellow and the blue, are typically going to be pitched for energy. But if you do need to charge, say you have like a bunch of blues in, this is also not a bad play to charge, because if you charge and you attack with Engulfing Light, they typically have to waste a card to block it, otherwise it goes into your soul, and that's still a decent scenario. So sometimes you get a defensive 3 out of their hand, and so it just leads those tempo. This is a deck that grinds out your opponent. It makes them use resources, because it gives them kind of these bad scenarios. If you just go Engulfing Light, charge a card, attack, and like, I'll just take the 1, then it goes into your soul. And that's super strong. Now you have 2 cards in your soul ready for a following turn to hit. So same thing with the yellow. It's a 2 attack. So strictly speaking, these are probably the best version. Yellow is just an additional 1 because it is a great pitch card. It is a great way to charge. You do want to be charging on your early turns no matter what. Charge with Bolton. So there's the red hits for 3. And again, if you do charge and they do block an attack action, that also gives an additional +1. All right, so the other one we are going to be running the full set of is Express Lightning. So this is another 0 one. 0 is super important in this. I actually like Express Lightning a little bit better than Bolt of Courage, which we'll be coming up with, just because I think the Bolt of Courage draw card isn't as relevant as you'd think with Bolton. I thought it was going to be relevant to like, oh, I can draw another card that could possibly be pitched for more energy, and I found that scenario not being played out that often, and they typically do just block it and not let you draw a card, and it's definitely not as good as going in your soul like Engulfing Light is. So these cards are pretty much the same card. So the difference is drawing card versus putting a card in your soul, and putting your card in your soul is much more important, because again, this oftentimes doesn't get Go Again. So if you draw a card, it's just a wasted card at that point, because what are you going to do with it? You would have drawn that card at the end of turn anyway. So I don't like to draw a card. So I think that Express Lightning is just the better, just because it deals 1 more damage. So again, that's the trade-off. These cards are very similar, very similar. That's why there's a lot of repetitive cards though in this. So it makes deck building a little bit less, I guess, I wouldn't say enjoyable or entertaining or even creative, more to speak, because this is more about tuning and finding the right one. Like really, they're all commons. They all are basically they're all the same cost, but which one is going to synergize the most with your cards? And the order I put these in would be Engulfing Light to Express Lightning to Bolt of Courage. So we are going to be running those, but for Bolt of Courage, I am just going to be running the blues and the yellows, because this is a card that I ideally am going to be using for energy and not for actually charging. It's going to be, if I get a handful of these, then of course the yellow one's going to go in to charge. So if this is my hand, for example, this isn't a bad turn. Charge, put in our Bolton. So pitch. I guess we don't need to pitch here. We could just charge, put in our Bolton, and arsenal a card and keep this up for the next turn, and then we'd have a guaranteed blue in our hand. That's not a terrible turn. Yeah, we only get in for 2, whoop-de-doo, but we've done something on our turn. We've arsenaled the card, we've charged, we've established like a nice little setup for our next turn. And yeah, and even that's not that bad too with even like a 2-hand. These are really good too with the 2-hand. Like if you had to defend, you could still just go charge, attack, and then you'd still done something on your turn. That's how I like about Bolton. You don't really have, even on your defensive turns, it feels like you're still progressing your game plan. Alrighty, so the last other charge card I'm going to run is Cross the Line. Now Cross the Line is a 1 cost. So typically speaking, I don't want to be using the blues and the yellows, because I want this card to be, I want it to be actually being a more aggressive card. So paying the 1, charging, attacking for 5 is also not a bad play. Again, after defensive play, when you have like 3 cards in your hand, even if you have like 3 reds in your hand, it's not bad just to pitch 1, cross the line, charge, and be good. Or, you know, just you have a 4th card, that's still not a bad card. You know, pitch, charge, and then arsenal 1. You've attacked in for 5. You've charged a card for later on big swing, and you've really done what you've wanted to do on a turn. The cards that we're going to be running, we don't run a lot of cards that like work off the charge ability. That's another way to build Bolton, is to really then start utilizing cards like the Valiant Thrust that say if you charge this turn, it gains +3. I've seen people use a lot of these red versions in decks because that's a big swing. It's going to be attacking for 7. The red version has a 4 attack. You'd be attacking for 7 on a turn. But these are actually a lot harder to get off than you would think, because you need to be pitching for the mana to then be using the 1 for the Valiant Thrust. So how are you going to charge and be able to play Valiant Thrust and Arsenal card on the same turn? A lot of times that has been the situation. So Valiant Thrust is typically, this is just going to be a blue card that's pitched. Why I like this one as a blue over some of the other cards, though, is if you do need to play it as a blue, this actually feels like a red card at that point. If you've charged and you have 1 remaining energy left over and swing in for 5, that is not bad. And it pumps itself up to give you go again. It's not a bad card for that. So I do prefer this one as the blue one, because ideally you're going to be pitching the blue, but if you need to use it as an on-pitch, it's great. So that brings us to the next one, is Courageous Steelhand. Same idea here is you're going to be most likely pitching the Courageous Steelhands, but if you have charge and do need to be able to give a go again to an attack, this is a nice way to give, because Bolton, remember, all you have to do for Bolton is increase the attack value of whatever you're attacking with, and you can gain go again with it by banishing a card from your soul. So Courageous Steelhand can do that, and that's why, of course, I prefer the blues and the yellows, because ideally they're going to be pitched for energy, but if you do need to use them to pump up and attack that turn, then you can. Again, I've seen some other charge type decks that are really using the yellows and the reds for Courageous Steelhand, because they work off the Bolt of Courage as like if it hits, draw a card, because then you can attack reaction and pump up your card, and then it's going to hit, then you're going to draw. That is an entirely different way to build a more consistent Bolton. It's like dishing in this damage with these attack reactions. And there's a few other cards you can run. There is what's the other one that gives a attack? It's another attack reaction that gives +3. And what does it do? And then if it hits, it goes in your soul. There are 6 cards like that that are pretty cool that you can actually run for these type strategies. There isn't even like there's like a big swing Bolton type deck, but again, our focal point on this one is going to be the weapons. And so running things, we want lots of energy cards. It's a very energy greedy deck. We don't want things costing a lot in its energy zone, because we're going to be focusing on our weapons, and we want things that can ideally pitch for energy to go for those big turns. So that's kind of my first deck tech with the Bolton Blitz. I'll be exploring this game a little bit more. Again, it does scratch that creative itch for sure. Not as much as I would say Magic does, not nearly as much, but it is a breath of fresh air. I don't think the game's going anywhere. It definitely has more depth than most of these games that we've seen, like Keyforge or Kaijudo or Dice Masters. Although I was still guilty pleasure to admit that I really like Dice Masters. And I wish that game would have succeeded. But anyway, there you have it. There's my Bolton deck tech. Looking forward to your comments in the comment section below, as well as your downvotes for yelling at me for selling out to Flesh and Blood. But yeah, don't believe all the crap nonsense going out here that this is an accessible game. If you want to build Bolton the tier 1 proper way, you're looking like $100 chest, I believe is what I looked at it. There are some expensive crap in this. Like, I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear that it's accessible. That was the most ridiculous interview that I saw by TCC, talking about how accessible this game was, because you can just buy a Blitz deck and play. Well, guess what? You can buy a Challenger deck and just play. That's not a fair comparison to give Magic like a horrible F, everything needs to be reprinted, when this, if you talk about things that need to be reprinted, or just the abysmal rarity that this, the all or nothing. Like, rares in this are like uncommons, and commons are like super commons, And, well, they're commons. And then we have Majestic that are a little bit higher than what I would consider in rare in Magic. And then you have some things like the legendaries and the S's that are they're just crazy. Like, to be able to get what you need, it requires a lot of, like, product opened. And, you know, there are some hefty price tags for these cards, especially like Crucible of War, which has only had the limited version, the first edition, come out. There are some expensive cards. So anyway, there you have it. This has been Kevin with the Rogue Deck Builder. Thanks for watching.